Welcome inside a special half edition of the scores table, I guess. Shouts to people who made it through the first hour and are back for hour number 2 or however long we go. For those who are just out for the previews, you're pretty great too. We appreciate everybody who listens. Brian Ench and Danny Rega with you, as we mentioned before. Courtney Delks, Josh Sable are both tied up today, so they weren't able to join us this week. That's also why Danny and I just went loose and cut loose for an hour. But Danny, let's talk about what's ahead, and specifically, I think the game you've been itching to talk about, the one that it seems like you've been wanting to start with, is Jennings County, Bedford, North Lawrence, sectional rivals. That sectionals come down to those two teams. I think basically every year it's the beginning of time, and also during that time, it's been Bedford, North Lawrence coming away with the win. This Jennings County team feels different, at least from my perspective, as somebody who's relatively new, but until it happens, Bedford North Lawrence remains the team to beat, and this year they come in with the added bonus of being the defending state champions. Initial takeaways from that matchup.
This one's deeper than just, two highly ranked teams or two South County teams going against each other. Bedford North Lawrence, to provide some context on the front end right now, Bedford North Lawrence has won 12 consecutive sectional titles. Okay. It's the longest such streak in girls basketball and boys basketball in this state. But to win 12, and they celebrate it and they parade it. And I think one year, I was at the sectional championship when they won, and I think it might've been their 11th straight. And after they won, they donned like 11 t-shirts, or t-shirts with 11 on them. To win 12 straight also provides, some perspective, I guess, that you have some really good players in the South that are in the Bedford North Lawrence sectional. I'm calling it the Bedford North Lawrence sectional. I think this year, where they playing that? Floyd Central, I think, is where they're playing that thing. I'm going to call it the Bedford North Lawrence Invitational, though that's sectional. But you have really good players that have never won a sectional because of Bedford North Lawrence. Like Jeffersonville, Jeffersonville's best player in the last 4 or 5 years, a kid by the name of Haan Garcia, who went on to Penn State. Let me see. Jacinta Gibson, she went on to Western Michigan. Amanda Moore at Seymour, she was an Indiana All-Star, went on to, she previously committed to Loyola Marymount, decommitted, and then went to Florida Gulf Coast. They've had Indiana All-Stars down there. They've had really good basketball players. They've had Miss Basketball candidates. This is Jennings County's best chance to end that streak. Okay. And I just gave a list with, Jacinta Gibson, Haan Garcia, Amanda Moore, kids like that. But Julianne Woodard does not want the designation of being the best basketball player never to win a sectional. Okay. Now, we are not previewing the sectional. Let me be clear about that. That's a very different coaching. It's a very different preparation. It's a very different atmosphere. But Bedford North Lawrence playing at Jennings County does give us the first look to see who is the alpha, who is the toughest fist in the room, kind of moving into that sectional. And I think this is a really good opportunity for Jennings County to establish themselves as the favorite going into it, because it's previously been, as I say, and again, everybody in North Vernon is going to get mad at me for saying this, but the Bedford North Lawrence Invitational. But Jennings County, coming off of what has been a really good season, they didn't have a great fourth quarter against Columbia City in the Hall of Fame, but this would take on a whole new meaning, I think, if they had won that basketball game. But you can throw the records out when these two teams play. There's so much familiarity between Christy Sigler and Jeff Allen. There's so much familiarity between Julianne Woodard and Chloe Spreen. All the role players, the parents know each other. And tomorrow night at Jennings County, North Vernon's going to represent. That gym's going to be packed. It's going to be a great atmosphere. I'm going to try to get down there if I can. It's a 2-hour drive. Work might get in the way, but for me, it's not as much schematic as much as it is this just county setup of, can Jennings County get past Bedford North Lawrence in sectional? We'll get our first look at kind of the matchup. So that's what I say. What say you, Brian?
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I mean, we've talked about it, and I'm sure other people have talked about it. It kind of feels like this year bust to an extent for Jennings County. In the regular season, like, this is just such a fun precursor, and the atmosphere down there is going to be unbelievable. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm thinking about trying to go down there, if nothing else, just to witness the atmosphere at Jennings County, because it's going to be the last time that we get to see these two on somebody else's home floor. You know, be Chloe Spreen and Julianne Woodard, obviously the headliners, but there's ample talent beyond those kids on both teams, so it'll be really fun to see. And I haven't seen Bedford North Lawrence since Sneakers for Santa, which was rough, but that's less than a month into the season. I'm sure that they're a much different team now than they were back then. Jennings County, I saw there at that event, was impressive. The men, and then there's their growth up until this point of the season. Seeing them last week at the Hall of Fame Classic is pretty tremendous. And for Jennings County, I'll stick with them. This is such an important stretch for them because it's Center Grove coming up next. And then they have Franklin at the end of the season. But for them, what was interesting at the Hall of Fame Classic was talking to their coach. That was the first time they'd been in a close game situation late. And I think I texted you about it, Danny, but remembering back to that Eastern Hancock-Lapel game where Lapel kind of looked lost at the end of the game, there were situations like that for Jennings County as well against Columbia City where they had opportunities to claw back into it and something went wrong, be it a turnover. Credit to Columbia City's defense, but they really heated up Jennings County, so to speak, and had them committing some mistakes that they aren't accustomed to making. And then when it came time to foul late, they were slow to foul as soon as the ball got across, or they didn't foul as soon as the ball got across. They were slow to get there. And that cost you valuable seconds. And in a sectional where no matter how good one team is and how down another team is, you know, that doesn't really obviously apply here, but no matter what, that game's always close in the sectional. And you have to, little things like that, like burning off 4 or 5 extra seconds, 3 or 4 extra seconds because you're slow to foul, make a huge difference in the long run. So little things like that are going to be important for Jennings County to learn from. That being said, they still feel, you know, pretty well-rounded and in a really good place coming in here to the first matchup with BNL.
Well, I saw Jennings County live at Columbus North maybe a couple of weeks prior, and there was a kid named McIntosh who's in their starting five who had a couple of really, really big threes in the South Bend, Washington game at Sneakers for Santa. And in that basketball game, Molly Ernstis got a box and one. Not Julianne Woodard, not Olivia Elmore. Molly Ernstis got the box and one and just didn't. It wasn't a huge statistical output basketball game for Molly. And you would immediately think, oh, well, Woodard's going to go crazy against a box and one in the middle of the floor, but they kind of collapsed the zone box wise. So when Woodard would get touches, she would be met with an immediate double. McIntosh, the same kid who hit the shots against South Bend, Washington, hit a couple of key shots against Columbus North. Okay. So what I want to talk about with Jennings County is like Christy Sigler really has some kids that are starting to play different basketball from the beginning of the season to this point now. And McIntosh is one of those kids. Olivia Elmore is another one of those kids who's now looking very healthy. Her lateral quickness looks very good. Her explosion looks very good. I think she had 8 straight points in the second half for Jennings County, not an 8-0 run, but 8 straight Jennings County points in that basketball game when Molly and Julianne Woodard were, trying to establish themselves or them trying to figure it out. But this one, because the familiarity is so good, the really interesting thing is going to be, what is Woodard's role in this basketball? Are you going to play through Woodard on every possession? Is this a Molly Ernstis game? Is this an Olivia Elmore game? Which role players are going to step up? I can tell you right now, Julianne Woodard wants Christy to play through her. Okay. And that's the easy money, right? I mean, here you have the Michigan State commit, one of the best basketball players in the state of Indiana, regardless of class, they want to play through her. Okay. But if I'm saying that very casually on this podcast, so is Jeff Allen and Bedford North Lawrence. Like, they might not let Julianne Woodard beat them. So what is an acceptable line for Julianne Woodard? Is this a basketball game where she can go out and get 30 and 15? Well, maybe not, because Bedford might not let her, but what's enough, right? So Julianne now is approaching this basketball game with, okay, I've got to establish myself, okay, but I can't really force shots. You know, where does Molly fit in? Where does McIntosh fit in? Where does Elmore fit in? Where does Etta Young fit in? So I think Christy is probably going to learn more than what Jeff will learn about Jennings County, Christy will learn more about Bedford North Lawrence and the way that they're going to guard him, because I think this will be a clue as to what Bedford North Lawrence thinks about Jennings County. Bedford North Lawrence will answer the question very early in this basketball game. You can't beat us if we take Julianne Woodard away, or this is a very balanced basketball team with Molly and Elmore and McIntosh and Woodard and everybody, that they're going to play it relatively straight up. So that's going to be kind of the cat and mouse between Christy and Jeff to really see how that plays out. I think the questions, if you reversed it and posed the questions back the other way, Jennings County questions about Bedford North Lawrence, they're not going to let Spreen beat them. But Spreen's so talented that she might beat him anyways. So this is something where, again, yes, the winner of this will probably emerge as the favorite in that sectional to win. Okay. But I'm very fascinated to see this cat and mouse game spread over a month between the two coaching staffs of Jennings County and Bedford North Lawrence.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, that I forgot to mention with Jennings County, they shot the ball really badly against Columbia City, especially from three. And after they just lit it up against Lake Central. You know, it's kind of like that. It all balances out in the wash, whatever. It was kind of that situation there. So I'm interested to see how they look from the perimeter. And part of me wonders, can you just say, okay, we're going to do our best against Spring, but understand she's going to get hers. We just can't let somebody else take off. But it seems like this series, you know, I'll look at the numbers here recently, but it seems like this series is such a low-scoring game where Jennings County is scoring in the 30s, 40s. You know, the sectional championship game a few years ago was 38-36 final. Last year's games were, you know, BNL finished in the 50s and Jennings County finished in the 30s, but it's the point where you can't let Spring get all of hers, because that might just be enough to lift Bedford North Lawrence over it. So you can't really just put all your eggs in, make the other four kids on the floor beat, or let the other four, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see with them and how they handle it.
Well, they haven't really done it yet, but you started to see some on December 22nd at that event. You started to see Spreen bring the ball up a little bit more. I mean, maybe they're starting to play Spreen just, you know, kind of maybe tacitly or subconsciously kind of preparing for the way that they're going to be in sectionals, which is, you know, we're going to ride our Miss Basketball candidate. We're going to ride Chloe. And so, you know, we need to have the ball needs to be in her hands a little bit more. So I think that's an interesting aspect too of this basketball game, is where does Spreen play? But back to Bedford North Lawrence. I mean, Jeff Allen and his right-hand man, Chase Spreen, I mean, they make no mistake about it. They love the defensive prowess of Madison Bailey. Okay. So the first question, the big question will be answered right away is, who does Madison guard? Because you can make an argument that Madison Bailey guards Molly Ernstis. You can make an argument that she guards the point guard, which everything starts with Olivia Elmore, or you can make the argument that she guards Julianne Woodard. Chloe Spreen's going to have to guard one of them too. So, you know, are you going to want to protect Chloe's fouls and not matching her up against Julianne Woodard? That's asking a lot of her, but then it is also best player versus best player. So I think where they put Bailey, I think will tell us a lot of what Bedford North Lawrence thinks about how to beat Jennings County, because if they put her on Ernstis, maybe it's an Olivia Elmore basketball game. You know, maybe she's going to have to be consistent, and she's, you know, she's certainly capable of winning a basketball game through statistic production for them, but it is different. Okay. Because again, I kind of said it through my little monologue earlier in talking about this basketball game. Woodard wants Christy to play through her, and that might not be an option. They might have to play through Elmore, but there's so many questions kind of leading up to it. But if Jennings County were to lose this basketball game at home in front of what I can only assume is probably half of North of Vernon, that's going to be crammed into that gym. If they don't get that win, that's going to give a huge mental edge to Bedford North Lawrence when they go down to Floyd Central and play, whether it's on Tuesday night or Saturday night. That's going to give a huge advantage to them. And Bedford hasn't really lit the world on fire. Another story coming into this too is we know, like, Indiana, like Chloe Spreen's going to be an Indiana All-Star. Julianne Woodard's going to be an Indiana All-Star. I mean, but the question remains, what number are those kids going to be wearing in that game? No one has look, If we want to look at the production in the senior year to award Miss Basketball, no one's really done much to say, well, that's the kid. Jordan Poole hasn't, Raiden Wilson hasn't, Chloe Spreen hasn't, Julian Woodard. Now, you can look back and at the junior year performance and even the sophomore year performance and who has state championships and who's played head to head. But this is a big opportunity if Julian Woodard and the company down in North Vernon believes very strongly that Julian Woodard should be fit for that one, then she's got to show it in this basketball game, because some of the votes are probably going to be in before that sectional matchup at Floyd Central later in the year when it gets closer to sectional time. But a good opportunity for Chloe Spreen to grab Miss Basketball, Julian Woodard to make a statement, things like this. So that's another kind of subplot to this basketball game that is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and starting with Miss Basketball, working backwards, I think with Miss Basketball, it's interesting because these kids are all having good seasons and they're all having they all have the good body of work, but it's like nobody's really just taking command and forced you to look at them, which is interesting, and it's going to make for a really interesting race. Then the question more becomes, well, which populations are going to be more active in the voting? I have kind of a sky view of the entire state, but other ones are more regionalized, which is part of what makes it cool. But it is really interesting. But there are flashes. We saw a flash from Jordan Poole. I saw at least a flash from her against Norwell, and we've seen it throughout the season. We saw it with Reagan Wilson against Fort Wayne Snider that same day. Now we get a chance. We got a little bit of a taste of it with Julianne Woodard at the Hall of Fame Classic. She was really good at that event. Not to undersell her, but that's one of the first times, second and third senior is really good. She's taking command for a lot of those games, including the Columbia City up to the end when you tip your cap to Columbia City for playing really well against her. But like you said, this is kind of their opportunity. And what I love about this game is that it is so important for both teams. Obviously, there isn't seeding at stake or anything like that in the state tournament, but Jennings County is on a 25-game losing streak against BNL. You lose this game again, it's 26 games going into sectional, and suddenly you're a lot more prone to that, oh, here we go again. On the flip side, for Bedford North Lawrence, there's some significance to this too. Less so with the winning streak, more so with get a win here and a really big confidence boost. I mean, this really blows up the resume. I think the Noblesville win is going to look really good by year's end, but in the moment right now, this feels like a really important game for them because they don't have a Franklin left on the schedule. They have Louisville, Sacred Heart out of Kentucky, but other than that, it's Castle, Columbus, Floyd Central, and a good Class A team in Borden. So an opportunity for them to kind of see where they're at and, again, kind of make that statement, if not for anybody else, but just as much for themselves, kind of okay, this is where we're at. This is what we have. We can still do this. We're still the team that everybody thinks we are. You know what I mean? So yeah. I think the mental game and the fallout from this game is really fascinating to look at. And it adds a lot of juice to the matchup, which itself, like you said, I mean, we're running through all these matchups and stuff, is going to be a lot of fun on its own. And it's just so many elements to it. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
Because of the importance for both basketball teams, particularly on the Bedford North Lawrence side, if Josh was on here and just kind of doing the pod with him, you start to maybe complete each other's thoughts. But he would say, I think I would keep it really vanilla. I don't think Jeff is going to keep this vanilla. Oh, I think he's going to try. I think he's going to try something to try to give him an edge, because I think he knows. I think they know in Bedford, if they can get this basketball game, that those demons are just going to create. It's just. Look, you don't win 12 straight sectionals without playing some mind games along the way.
It's a mental thing, yeah.
It really, really is. And so this is a big one for Jennings County because it's going to be in front of their home folks. And then, Jeff also has the opportunity too, where if they junk them a little bit, or if they maybe they trap ball screens, just something maybe that they don't normally do. I just picked trap ball screens just as a arbitrary example to say something that they don't maybe normally do, but they can trash it. And now in Christie, if they can circumvent it or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe even 2 or 3 different things that are wrinkles in their normal traditional defensive game plan against Jennings County. I wouldn't be surprised to see 2 or 3 different things. I wouldn't be surprised to see some junk. I wouldn't be surprised to see just careless doubles. Where you're just going to leave kids and go double. Woodard in this basketball game, when Woodard wants touches, and this is just my experience in being around Julianne and knowing the rope that Christie gives her, I wouldn't be surprised to see Julianne Woodard grab defensive rebounds, and try to bring the basketball up, try to get some early action in live ball change of possession, because I just don't know if Jeff, through their scout and through their familiarity with Woodard specifically, but Jennings County as a whole, is going to allow them to get their staple high-low or their staple baseline out of bounds sets. So I think Woodard's going to have to play a little bit off schedule, and her effectiveness in off schedule production that she's able to put in is, to me, is the key. Is what can Woodard get off schedule?
Real quickly, as we move on to some other games too, I think you brought up a great point about coaches not holding anything back for this game, because for them, I think there's some experimentation and there's some value in that too. Like, throw some stuff at the wall, try out some different things, and see what works. Because I think too, with two teams like this, and I don't know if you agree with this, but they're so familiar with each other, it's not like they're going to do anything earth-shattering anyway. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to be surprised necessarily by anything they see, short of trying to run out somebody, standing on top of somebody else's shoulders wearing a trench coat, like something stupid like that. I don't think there's really any space for surprise here. And it's going to be the same thing when we talk about LN, LC in a couple weeks, where there's no room for surprise because they're so intimately familiar with each other. Same thing for Noblesville and Fishers and HSE, Westfield, Zionsville, and Carmel in Sectional 8 tournament at the end of the year. And, this isn't like when the Millers, the reason why I mentioned Noblesville, this isn't like a couple years ago when they made their state run and they busted out of nowhere this boxing one against Crown Point. I remember that at the Limestone Classic. And after spending the entire week preparing for that 1-3 or the 1-3-1 press that Noblesville runs, Crown Point was suddenly faced with a boxing one against Carruthers, and they weren't ready for it because they'd never seen that from them before. Well, this is totally different because there's so much familiarity between those teams. So there are no surprises to be thrown out there. And at this point of the season, I think there's probably more value in doing that versus the gamesmanship, just trying to find what works, see what clicks. And once you know that it works, obviously the other team knows it works too. So then you start deviating from that a little bit and seeing what works. But it's going to be a fascinating and really fun matchup.
Yep.
And their rivalry and their sectional history segues perfectly into Brownsburg-Avon, which is the game that I'm missing so that we can take this right now. The game will have happened by the time you're listening to this, but it's worth mentioning Avon beat Brownsburg for the first time in forever. We get to see them in the Hendricks County tournament. Winner plays Plainfield. Danville Cascade on the other side plays Tri-West. As county tournaments go, this one comes a little bit later in the game. But, Danny, this one, it's going to be interesting to see with the 4A participants how things shake out.
Yeah, so if you look at the Sagarin ratings of the teams, and I'm going to remove Danville from the conversation because of because they're not 4A. But the 4A teams, Plainfield, Brownsburg, and Avon, are only separated by 10 spots in the rankings. So this is a wide open sectional when we get into it. And the Hendricks County tournament is our first really kind of clue into it, okay? Avon and Brownsburg, both of them respectively, do not have winning records. Plainfield is actually the basketball team that's doubled them up with wins. They have 12 wins this year so far. So the Hendricks County tournament for me is very similar. A very similar conclusion can be drawn out of the Bedford, North Lawrence, Jennings County thing. And it starts with Avon Brownsburg tonight, but who's the favorite there? I mean, I said just very casually in a couple of episodes ago that I think the best player in the sectional might be Anaya Smith. But then you have Avery Gordon. I mean, and let's look at Plainfield, for example. And we haven't really talked about them, okay? But they are quietly having a really good season. And there's a kid on their basketball team by the name of Hannah Menser, okay? And if you don't know that name, you're going to know it for the next 4 years because she's one of the best freshmen. And I used to coach on the same staff as Natalie Morse. And 5 years ago, just very casually, when Hannah Menser and the 27s were like 6th or 7th graders, I just asked her very casually, was like, who do you think is the best 27? And she said Hannah Menser. And this is years ago. So it's quite the prognostication by Natalie to say that she was going to be this good. But Hannah's leading them in scoring. She's a 27. She's leading them in scoring. She's shooting 42% from three. She's averaging 16 points per game. And then when you add Berkeley Williams and Peyton Benj and the experience of Peyton Benj and obviously the familiarity with the coaching staff and what they're trying to do there, this is a very, very good basketball team. And they're very, very well coached by Kurt. if Plainfield goes on to win the Hendricks County tournament, I think I would say that they're probably the favorite going into it. But again, you have Anaya Smith and Avery Gordon in this Avon-Brownsburg matchup kind of early to see who goes on to play Plainfield. This is really a toss-up between those three basketball teams. And so I'm going to reserve the right to really kind of delineate or rank these teams within there until I really kind of see what happens with the Hendricks County tournament. But again, it's the same sort of deal because you have these basketball teams like Plainfield being maybe the more balanced of the three, but it's interesting to see, okay, how do we play Brownsburg when Avery Gordon's on the floor? We're going to play behind her. Are we going to front her, which gives up rebounding position? If I play behind her, do I have somebody with the strength to push her out to make her catch the basketball out onto the floor, maybe 10 feet away from the basket to keep her away from jump hooks, right and left hand? How are we going to play Anaya Smith? Are we going to double her from the jump? Are we going to sag off of her? Are we going to give her this three? We're going to force her left. There's a lot of different things. And so I think the coaching staffs of these three respective basketball teams, I don't think they're going to, the same thing with Bedford, North Lawrence, Jennings County. I don't think they're going to keep it very vanilla at all. I think they're going to see, and this is now, right, Hank, this will be the second time all these teams have played each other. So that now you have an opportunity to say, okay, well, that didn't work in the first game. Let's try this. But I also mentioned before we throw it back to you, I know Hannah's been out. I think it's concussion protocol. I don't know for sure. I'm not super tight with the Menser crew. I probably send a text and find out right now. But it'll be interesting to see if Hannah Menser's back. If she's not back for the Hendricks County tournament, that's going to be a really big disadvantage, I think, not to Plainfield, but to Avon and Brownsburg, because now they're going to have to prepare for a basketball team in sectionals that has Hannah Menser, their leading scorer, now suddenly back in the lineup.
Yeah, and you mentioned it too. It feels like on paper, Plainfield's probably the most well-balanced of the three, Brownsburg and Avon, because they have the size inside with, is it Bang or Bange? Bang with Payne.
I think Benj. Yeah, Benj.
Okay. Yeah, Sable would make fun of us here for not knowing how to pronounce it. No,
well, I punctuated that with a question mark, like Benj. Yeah. Like it's Peyton Benj. Yeah.
Yeah. But they have size inside with Peyton B. That's what we're gonna go with this year, and Coach B. But no, and then like you mentioned, I mean, then they have the two really good guards. Avon has a really good guard play. They're athletic as heck. They're catching a lot of teams by surprise because this program's been down for a while, but Will's doing a fantastic job over there. And then Brownsburg has a Purdue commit anchoring inside who's a matchup nightmare for literally everybody that they play. It's just a question of how far along have their guards developed, because losing Kaylin Terrell last year, I mean, that's a big loss. She was a really excellent, talented point guard who really ran things for them. So how far are they going to have come and progressed? And I'm interested to see if they win tonight. I'll obviously see them this weekend. If they lose, then it'll be later down the line that I'll see them. But how have those guards come along, and where's this group at? Because that's kind of been like the bugaboo for Brownsburg is, yeah, they have this big inside who's super talented, wicked good, but the guard play who's handling the ball for them and some of those other little things that balance that team out. So like you said, I mean, we're going to learn a lot, and this has a sectional feel. Like, this is how the tournament could draw up, and if we seeded it, honestly, this could be how it would look too with Avon. Well, no, I guess the Terre Haute schools. I take that back. Never mind. The draw still sucks. But this is how it could set up theoretically, feasibly, where you have these two teams. It seems like Avon and Brownsburg play in sectionals in every sport: softball, soccer, boys and girls, and basketball, regardless of what happens, and volleyball. So this could be how it shakes out with the draw, is that those who play with the winner playing Plainfield, then whoever wins that gets to play one of the Terre Haute schools. So really interested to see how it shapes out. And then I haven't had a chance to see Danville yet, but just knowing them and their tradition of success, I mean, they gave Brownsburg a run for their money last year. I'm not looking past Tri-West. I think Tri-West has come a long way. On year one under Justin Bennett, I mean, they're 9-6 this year, which is pretty impressive. A bit of a slide here, three of those four, but they almost picked off 4A Whiteland the other day, so that's something to write home about. And they played Danville really close, and they played in middle of November, so that'll be an interesting game. And then whoever wins that one gets to play whoever emerges from the 4A mess as well. So it'll be fun to see. Shout out to Cascade, who I'm rambling here. I realized that I forgot Cascade lost some piece from last year, so they're a bit of a rebuild, but who knows? As they listen to this back, I'm sure they'll be listening, expecting to hear that they won because they pulled the upset on Danville and rendered all of this useless. But Danville getting there would be really exciting to see that because, I mean, the schedule's going to ratchet up for them with McCutcheon coming up still down the way. Trenton Central is always a tough team to beat. So it's going to be a fun week of basketball over in Hendricks County.
Well, it may be overly redundant to go back to Menser here, but again, let's just kind of accentuate the point that she's a freshman, right? And so I think this is a really valuable experience for her. Like when they played, I don't know if it was a holiday tournament or just recently, she had 24 points against Ron College. She had 24 points against, and that's Cerny and Lindsay and Leffler and like that. I mean, they got a lot of really good guards that can get out on the floor and defend. But I think Menser is probably the most fascinating watch in all of this because if I called the Twin Lakes tournament, maybe the statewide introduction to Lily Graves, I probably have to apply the same formula to Hannah Menser. Maybe we can shed light on this Henry County tournament, and maybe if she's back out of concussion protocol, that this will be her opportunity to really get out. But she's going to be just like every 27, just like Kenzie Cook, Lily Graves, Ada Hupfers, some of the Riley Kanan, some of these really good 27s that are across the state. Hannah Menser is a very different basketball player that she was at Halloween when she first started playing varsity basketball. Oh, yeah. And I think we know that from being able to go out and get 24 against Roncalli. Now, I think she only had 7. I'm judging from the 7 that she had against Zionsville in that 42-40 basketball game. It leads me to believe that that's when the injury occurred. That seems like a relatively low offensive output by a really good basketball player in Hannah. But and just a little side note here, if the last name Menser rings a bell, we're just on the eve of the Hall of Fame. When I was Hannah's age, Hannah's dad is Michael Menser, who played in the Hall of Fame against Luke Recker. And I remember that there were probably, and I'm not exaggerating this, and somebody out of the Plainfield community fact check me on this, but Luke Recker was the name. And he was like AAU teammates with Michael Menser, Hannah's dad, but like Luke Recker was like born in candy stripe pants. Now he ended up playing some college basketball in Indiana, but also played some at Iowa and Arizona. But he was the guy, and Menser stole the show. Like that was hit like at Batesville High School. And I was at that game and I remember it. And when I saw that Menser, when Natalie told me that 5 years ago, I was like, that Michael's daughter? And she's like, yeah. So, maybe Hannah can channel her inner dad and have one of those dream weekends that Michael had her dad.
And we talked about Molly Ernst too from Jennings County. I mean, Berkeley Williams is another one of those stars from the class of 26 where they got, that's a big class too. A lot of rising talent. It's fun to see, aside from the big names of Peyton B and Avery Gordon and everybody else over there.
Peyton B. Yeah.
Listen, you can't mispronounce it if you abbreviate it. I need to stop that when I'm writing too. You can't misspell it if you abbreviate it. I don't think my boss would like that. Kids probably won't either. Another game that I wanted to touch on with you, and we talked about Franklin a little bit, but they have an interesting game coming up against Mooresville. Mooresville is really consistent, steady. They had kind of a weird loss. I tried to pull up their schedule. They had a weird loss to close out the holiday season, I think, against one of the Bloomington schools. I want to say it was Bloomington North got them, which is a bit surprising, but for them, kind of a statement game opportunity against a really good Franklin team. And for Franklin, one of those teams that you could see come play postseason time if they're able to get out of their sectional tournament and a rematch from a few years ago at semi-state.
Yeah, I mean this in as a compliment, but Mooresville's like a grimy, tough, like hard-nosed community, and it's portrayed by their girls basketball team and their basketball coach Mark Hurt. And Mark Hurt probably, I'm guessing, and I don't think I'm going to be wrong, I think he has over 400 wins, like 400 wins for Mark Hurt. And
462 at Mooresville, 524 overall.
Okay, over 500 wins. Coach Hurt, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sell you short there. But they took an early loss to Bedford North Lawrence. I think it was Bedford North Lawrence's first basketball game. It was by double digits. They have Rachel Harshman, and that's a very difficult place to go in and try and play. I remember when Chloe Spreen played there when she was like a freshman or something like that, and their student section was all over her from the jump. But But they lost that basketball game, and it was very easy and very natural to be like, oh, well, maybe Mooresville's down. Maybe there's not a lot around Harshman or whatever. And here they are with 14 wins, and true as science, and they figure into the mix. This, I think, is a bigger basketball game for Mooresville than it is for Franklin. Again, Franklin being really, really unique. But this is a basketball game that boils down to contrasting styles, right? You have the spread 5-out exit cut 3-point shooting team that is Franklin. And then you have this tough, grimy, we're going to be tougher than you, we're going to punch you in the throat kind of attitudes from Mooresville. And whichever tempo really, supersedes the other is probably going to win this basketball game. But if Mooresville can get it from Franklin, I think they figure to be a favorite going into the sectional and to get out of the sectional and to be is that actually checking in? Is that Center Grove sectional?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe not the favorite, but at least it'll make Center Grove think about it. Okay. All due respect to Center Grove. Sorry about that. I don't have the sectional draws. Yeah. I know, right? Yeah, okay. I don't need the entire city of Greenwood against me. Josh, help. But they have 14. Look, they have 14 wins. Before I blew it with that last favorite of the sectional comment. No, they're tough. They're tough. They're grimy. Mm-hmm. Harshman is the same kid, right? She's the same kid that we always talk about. It's like feel like she's been in high school forever, the same way that Clem has. And so this isn't new to Harshman also. She's played against Clem, Kimbrell, Erica, York. Like she's played against all these kids.
So playing against each other.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So this is a very fascinating matchup. If Franklin doesn't get it, I think Franklin's fine. I think Franklin is one of the 10 best teams in the state. I think they are a formidable threat to win the state championship. I think they're really good. I think they're very well coached. But again, what I like about them is they have an identity. Furthermore, they have a unique identity that is just maybe unique to them. But big one for Mooresville. Let's keep our eye on that one.
It was Evansville North that got Mooresville last week. They beat Bloomington North. So sectional matchup there at Bloomington North. But yeah, to your point, this definitely feels like a more important game for Mooresville, kind of that chance to get that signature win for them. They played some good teams close and have been able to kind of skate by some other ones, but there's some good talent there with Harshman, Bunch, and Ava Schaefer there. So I like what they have, and it definitely agree, like you said, and like I just said, it definitely feels more important for Mooresville, if not for no other reason than just to get that signature win, get some confidence going in, because that sectional is going to be bare with Center Grove, who Danny thinks is not as good as Mooresville.
Thanks.
God. Just kidding. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, it's going to come down to those two unless Bloomington North is able to upset somebody and, create some chaos there. They have Robin Holt, who's a really good player. Robin Holt, she just scored her 1,000th career point. But it'll be interesting to see. And when they play Center Grove, if they play Center Grove, we haven't seen that matchup yet. So this is the closest comp that we're going to get for Mooresville to Center Grove is Franklin, because they're in the same county tournament. They've played each other twice now. So really interesting game. I'm excited to see how it turns out, that one over there. I know, Danny, that was the end of the list of games we had. We already touched up in Washington. As I look at my list, is there anything else, any other games that are jumping out to you or any other teams you wanted to talk about as we wrap out this 90-minute experiment?
No, I mean, just kind of searching through my calendar right here. HSE on Friday hosts Westfield. That's a team that we haven't really given a lot of sound to, is Westfield. That'll be an interesting one because there's familiarity again between, between those, the kind of the Hamilton County play. And again, I keep going back to Hamilton County. Let me establish the significance here. I mean, Hamilton County has been super relevant in determining the state championship, whether it's this year with HSE being the number one team in the coaches poll, whether it's years ago when Sidney Parish and Hamilton Southeastern won, whether it's Fisher's last year, whether it was Noblesville with Ashlyn Shade and Reagan Wilson and Meredith Tipner in that state championship. The Hamilton County emergence and who gets out of that sectional really figures to be a clue as to who is going to represent the north side of the state in the state championship. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here in saying that Westfield is probably maybe not a true threat to maybe win the state championship, or maybe a popular pick to win the state championship. But we get to find out if they are a tough out or somebody that you want to draw in sectional 8. So just maybe kind of an interesting point kind of moving forward. I pick out Westfield because we haven't really talked about them.
I got to see them play Carmel a few weeks ago, and they're definitely, I mean, they beat Fishes earlier this year on the buzzer beater by Ellie Keller, I think it was. They hung with Zionsville. They took Zionsville to overtime, a game which they led and probably should have won. Westfield, that is. Noblesville game was a low-scoring, weird slobber knocker, 41-30 type game. I remember kind of following that remotely. And then over the weekend, they had Lawrence North and played them. It seemed like maybe a little bit tougher through the first half, at least, than the final score, which is a 17-point difference might indicate. But yeah, I mean, I think the sectional 8 is kind of setting up where you have some different tiers, like you were alluding to earlier. And I think Westfield is in that tier of they could definitely catch them on the wrong day where they're really hot. They could mess some teams up in some seasons, surprisingly, and get out of there. Do they have enough to run all the way to state? I'm not sure, but get out of that sectional and anything can happen. You know what I mean? And especially that sectional where you'd have all the momentum in the world and you'd be coming off of some massive upsets, likely along the way, at least one. They're a dangerous team. And I think that they're in there kind of with Zionsville, where it's like, we're going to see what happens. I think maybe Zionsville just a little bit of an edge just with some of their training experience that they have. But there's a lot to like about Westfield. And I think the wins that they had early in the year speaks a lot about that team. And I think Kelsey Steele's a great coach. So that'll be fun. And two, while we're in the sectional and talking about teams we haven't talked a ton about, Carmel, they upset Noblesville in a really emotionally charged game. And they threw up a lot of three-pointers in the game that I saw with them, and they were hitting some of them to keep things close against Westfield. So again, I don't know if they have enough firepower to get out of the sectional necessarily, but they definitely have enough where, again, catch them on the wrong night, and they're gonna mess some teams up. They're gonna mess up a team's season because they just can't be stopped from three, and suddenly have like a Norfolk State Mizzou game, one that haunts me as a Mizzou basketball fan for a few years ago, where they can't miss. You have a disaster on your hands. So yeah, that'll be interesting. That was a good one from you. That Hamilton Southeastern Westfield game, by the way, is next Friday the 12th, or next whatever the 12th.
Friday, yeah, Friday the 12th, yeah. And it starts this run too, where like HSE, like they go like Lawrence North, Center Grove, there's another really good Zionsville, Hamilton Southeastern. If they can get through this gauntlet, like, I mean, with their strength of schedule, I mean, you're going to see that climb up. I don't know if they have enough on their schedule to catch Noblesville as the toughest schedule in the state, but it's going to be pretty darn close. They're going to be battle tested for sure.
Yeah, and HSD is kind of in a weird spot because Columbia East is obviously down after they graduated, the Poole kid from last year. So, some of those games that would have looked really tough at the beginning of the year in previous years are down a little bit. But still, yeah, like you said, I didn't even realize how stacked up it is down the stretch with the LN, Zionsville, Center Grove after this Westfield game coming up. So that'll be really interesting to see. And then should probably mention Zionsville while we're here. They beat Plainfield 42-40. They grinded one out, and then for them, they kind of have their big three tests at the end of the year with Noblesville, Hamilton, Southeastern, and Brownsburg over 3 consecutive Fridays. I really like the way that Andy McGuire structures the schedule, where the kids get some time to recharge, the coach gets some time to recharge before they dive into sectionals. But they're doing this while also playing some really talented teams like Noblesville, HSC, and Brownsburg. So they're an interesting team to watch as well. There's one other game that I had circled that I just lost. So, Danny, is there anything else that you have before we
back to Zionsville? Zionsville's really experienced, which is what you need. And they're not just experienced in their starting five. They're particularly experienced in their backcourt. Like Allie Caldwell and Emma Haan, both being 24s, that really leads into who they are, right? They're a well-coached basketball team with a lot of experience that's going to make winning plays in big basketball games. And Emma Haan, over the last 365 days, just to kind of stay with her for a second, like she might be the most improved player. Now, that's a very careless comment. It's really just familiar, but she is so good now. And she does have the game and the talent to be able to go out and dominate a basketball game and win a basketball game for them. Okay. And with Allie there, and the two are really good friends and they play off of each other really well. Zionsville is is probably the team when you lump Westfield, Zionsville, and Carmel together. Yes, there's, Ellie Kelleher and Loveless and what Westfield brings, and with Carmel with Mackenzie Wood and Lauren Perry, who, shout out to her, she just got her first Division I offer. But Zionsville is probably the team that's set up that if you want to turn sectional 8 onto its side and really mess up Saturday night, Zionsville's probably the basketball team that's best set up to do so, because of kids like Emma Haan and the experience of Haan plus Caldwell kind of bring you. And then they have the emergence. We talked about the emergence of the 27s when we talked about Hupfer and Graves and Cook, and when we were talking about Menser. They have a freshman by the name of Mackenzie Chapman, who's been super productive and going to be a really, really good player in Hamilton County for the next 4 years.
And the thing that's fun with Emma Haan is that she's kind of been like not under the radar, because I feel like a lot of us have had eyes on her, but just like it's been fun watching her evolve kind of into this leadership role where this is her team now. Layla Hall has graduated. Now this is kind of Emma's team, and she's taking control of it. And it's been fun to see, because she was their X factor a couple of years ago, and she was out. I think it was with a broken hand that forced her to miss time, and Zionsville kind of sputtered. Then she came back, and Sunday they took off. Last year, the same thing, where she played kind of the star alongside the eventual Miss Basketball winner. And this year, we're just kind of seeing the completion of that evolution, where it's her team alongside Allie Caldwell, and they're really taking this thing by the reins. The one concern that I have with Zionsville, and it's super pronounced to them, is that it's their top 5 to 6, and that's it. And then that 6th player is just them. They rotate in and out their bigs, obviously. So not a lot of depth. That could be a bugaboo, especially in that sectional where it's going to be such a grind. But like you said, I mean, with that experience that they have, I think that they have a shot at winning that thing. And weird stuff happens in sectional. I'm reminded of it every year by our editor, my editor, Mac Linesk. It's just weird stuff happens in sectional. And Zionsville, Westfield are definitely two of those teams that can cause some of that weirdness to happen with them. Moving into the Indianapolis area is again, I try and fail to bring this home. Chatard has a little big stretch coming up here where they have Westfield. Guerin is in a tough spot because they lost their big freshman.
Yeah, they lost Morelli.
Yeah, I learned over the weekend that she's out with injury, which is tough to see. And then they go into the city tournament. And this year, the city tournament is interesting because it feels, Cathedral's always dangerous being the 4A school in there. But, Chatard, I think, is probably the favorite. But Heritage Christian, they played Chatard pretty tough before. I like the pieces they have. They have some good athleticism. Maya Davis is a really talented player. The Marshall kid, Jocelyn Marshall, is a really talented player. New coach, weird situation where they found out they got the new coach weeks before practices start. Yeah. They're kind of been work in progress, but that's going to be a really interesting tournament coming up here next week, because it'll have started by the time we tape this. And then you throw in some of the city schools there. I like to show them some love, where Tech has a really good player in Lacombe, and Addicts always seems to kind of be there among the city's girls teams. They're always kind of hanging in there. Heron has an awesome record this year. They got off to such a great start against kind of a softer schedule, but they have a really good player over there too. So the city tournament, I think the early rounds are going to be ripe for some parity depending on how the matchups shake out. And then by the end, we're going to see probably either Cathedral, Chatard, and Heritage Christian, some combination of those three, which will be really fun to watch and see where they go.
Yeah, I agree. And Morelli, and it's not a ligament. She's in a boot. So again, without knowing the details of the injury, she's going to be a name that's going to figure into the mix for the next few years. But we're really robbed of what that could have been with if she had stayed healthy. But you're probably right. I mean, and Chatard, we learned a lot about Chatard with, and I talked about it, I think, on the last one before we spliced it, but Caskey's just, again, her statistical output isn't gonna wow you or grab headlines or tweets, but she just affects the basketball game in so many different ways. She seems to know she know who she is. She's accepted her role, and she stars in that role, and she does a really good job. So yeah, I like Chatard. I like what they can bring to that city tournament for sure.
And what I love about Chatard, and this goes with Addie Baxter too, and a bunch of other athletes, but Chatard specifically, just how many multi-sport athletes they have, where it's like you can't blindly pick somebody on the roster and it's probably going to be a multi-sport athlete. Like Anna Caskey's coming to play D1 softball. Addie Duncan, who we talked about in the last portion of this show, is a soccer player. Berzai, who had a great weekend, is a soccer player, and just so many of those kids play multi-sports. It's part of their identity and something that Dan Wagner hangs his head on, is really proud of. So yeah, that's a cool tidbit with them. Two things quickly before I promise I'll shut up. Hamilton has Cameron I'm told is closing in on 2,000 career points, so good for her. That'd be a cool achievement. She's so much fun to watch. Like her at that lapel game was just, I mean, she's unbelievable. Unbelievable to watch there. And then West Lafayette too is 9-6. They're in that same sectional as Twin Lakes, but they've quietly put together a good season, and one of those teams that for me personally probably got overlooked a little bit, undeservedly so. Same with Rensselaer.
Rensselaer. Yeah, that's correct. Correct pronunciation, Brian. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I'm proud of me too, Danny. It's tough out here, you know. But no, the tolling kit for them is really good. So they have some good pieces. I'm interested and excited to lean more into our Central. Not going to push my luck with them, but yeah, a lot of good teams across the state, and yeah, it's gonna be fun. It feels like this week's a little bit of a dial back, which is kind of like the county tournament is the headliner. But as soon as you get through this, man, we still got Homestead, Snider, bunch of other games. Obviously, BNL Jennings County this week, but we're gonna really ramp it up here in the back half of January, and I for one cannot wait.
Yeah, and I'll kind of give the Indianapolis listeners something to kind of watch. January 12th, I irresponsibly just kind of said HSC Westfield. That's also the day that Snider plays at Homestead. And so that's going to be Jordan Poole. That's going to be Maya Epps. That's going to be Coach Parker. That's going to be two of the teams that we've traditionally seen in Marion in the regional. I know outside of the kind of the reseeding, but you cannot write the story of what happens in the postseason without talking about Homestead. They're just always there in the end. Coach Rod Parker he just does a tremendous job. And I was at a summer league game at Hamilton Southeastern, and I've gotten to know Coach Parker through the years really, really well. And I'm a big Maya Epps fan. I think she's really, really good. I think she's really talented. I think she's more sturdy than maybe some of the other, kids at her age, her being a 26. But, hopefully I'm not violating too much confidence here, but Rod was saying that there are some things that Maya Epps does on the floor athletically, performance wise, that he said Ayanna Patterson, Yaya, who won Miss Basketball and is now in Storrs, Connecticut, for the meantime, that Yaya didn't do. So, you're going to have Epps and Poole and this power struggle of what goes on in Fort Wayne. And with a win by Snider, I mean, we have a little bit more familiarity with Snider, perhaps because they came down and played at Noblesville. And so in the central Indiana area, we might be a little bit more familiar with them. But boy, that is an interesting basketball game because we give a lot of sound to Columbia City. But again, you can't tell the story of what's going to happen in Fort Wayne without mentioning Snider and Homestead and how this all shakes out in the end. So January 12th, stream that one. Yeah,
and I mean that sectional, like you said, is going to run through Homestead. And you know who Homestead's beaten this year? They've beaten Norwell. They've lost to Noblesville by 6 at home. They've beaten Dwenger. I'm confusing Dwenger with Mooresville. But yeah, I mean they've got a good schedule, and they played some teams from out of state over the holiday break. They'll be in town tonight, actually, as we tape this against North Central. Then turn around and host Ben Davis. Just a couple of tune-ups, like you said, before that Snider game. And I'm really excited to see that because that's another one similar to BNL. Jennings doesn't have quite the same history, obviously, but it still does bring a lot of heat. It's a boys-girls doubleheader, I'm assuming, with a 6 p.m. start. Place is going to be packed. I remember Yana Patterson's senior year seeing pictures of the line out the door down the street and then having to cut it off for the girls' game, too, because it was such a big deal. And you remember how talented that Snider team was? Well, most of those kids are now seniors, similar to what we have with Franklin. So it's going to be an awesome, awesome spectacle over there, and I can't wait. And like you said, I mean, Homestead's kind of easy to overlook. Not easy to overlook. That's the wrong way to put it. But it's easy to lose some of these teams like a Homestead in the shuffle of everything else that's happening just because Snider has a Miss Basketball candidate and was just here, so they're fresh on our minds. Same with Columbia City, where they have 2,000-point scores potentially, and we're just, in the Hall of Fame Classic and beat a couple quality teams. But Homestead's just as live as anybody else to make some noise in the state tournament. Same with the Franklin down in the South. So, like, bringing this all full circle, I mean, the state tournament is just going to be bonkers. And I think that it would be really appropriate for me to, again, put you on the spot and say pick a state winner.
You are so mean.
I won't do that because that would be mean, and I want to wrap this up here. But yeah, anything else? Any last chance for anything else? Any controversial topics you want to throw out there so that we can go another hour and a half like before?
No, it's good, and hopefully we didn't lose all of our listeners without Courtney and Josh, but really happy to have them back. But we'll have some more content for you, but yeah, happy New Year to everybody. It's been fun. Let's all re-engage.
Absolutely. We thank you all so much for listening. Shouts to the ones who did through the entire 2 hours of girls basketball talk with the 2 least popular members of the dais. Hopefully Josh and Courtney will be back next week. If not, well, I mean, they will be. It's fine. Scheduling snafus. But again, thank you all so much for listening. We'll be back with you all next week.